Hey there! So this is going to be a quick tutorial on how to do some basic sketching, and this is really around sketching for visual communication. As a designer, drawing is one of the most fundamental skills you will use in any type of field that you go into, any subfield within design. You're always going to need to be able to draw. And specifically, there's one type of drawing that will kind of follow you throughout your career, and being able to master it is going to make you a better designer, a better communicator, and it's actually quite useful whether or not you're in the field of design. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is drawing for visual communication. This is separate from artistic drawing in that in artistic drawing, it's really the hero is the drawing itself. And what we're going to talk about today is drawing as a means to communicate an idea. So the idea is the hero, and your drawing just needs to be good enough to communicate your idea. And there's a bunch of benefits to this. It facilitates collaboration, it helps you externalize your ideas, it helps you think. It's such a powerful tool, and one that actually isn't that hard. So whether or not you have any experience drawing, my goal is that you're going to be able to feel confident going up to the whiteboard, going up to your sketchbook, sharing ideas, and using your ability to kind of conceive and externalize things using communication tools like a Sharpie and a Flair pen. Super simple. So let's get to it. Okay. So again, one of the things about artistic drawing is oftentimes, and I fell into this trap too, I got super intimidated because I was like, oh, my apple doesn't look exactly like an apple, or, my perspective isn't quite as perfect as, those architectural drawings that I see. That is basically just that for me anyway, that totally slowed me down. It made me super self-conscious. It made me really tentative as I was drawing, and it made it take forever to do a drawing that frankly wasn't that good. What we're going to do is, I don't care if the building you draw looks exactly like a building. What's important is that I can tell it's a building. And what you want to do is create enough of a building, enough of a representation that someone can get it very quickly, and then you can move on. Because again, it's about the ideas you're trying to communicate, not the drawing itself. So if you can make an apple in 2 seconds, that's way better than a perfect looking photorealistic apple that took you hours or even days to draw. That's a super cool skill, but not something that's going to serve you well as a designer. The other thing I want to mention is that I learned this style after I'd been drawing for quite a while, but I learned it from two women, Molly Wilson and Kate Rutter, and they did this workshop at the D School at Stanford University called Whiteboard Warrior. And it was so powerful, and this is like the content I'm sharing with you today is so driven by what I learned from them. So full credit, look them up. They're kind of amazing folks that are doing all sorts of other stuff these days. But let's get to it. Okay, so what you will need is 2 weights at a minimum. 2 weights of markers. So I like this. Flair pen and a Sharpie are kind of a good combination, just because, as you will be able to see, the Flair pen gives me that mark and the Sharpie gives me that mark. So without any kind of subtle pressure variations, I get 2 distinct marks. So that's great. You can use 3 if you want, but one of the things I love about this way of drawing is that you don't need any real fancy tools. You can get away with some just really straightforward stuff and create a lot of sophistication within that. My goal for this session is that you feel more confident drawing. Drawing is, it's much more like a sport or a musical instrument, right? The more you practice, the better you'll get. The idea here is that you are only going to get better if you do it, and if you're having fun and kind of having the courage to make a mark on the page, you're going to get much better, and it's going to be much more effective. The other critical thing here is that drawing is a way of thinking differently. It's a way of getting your thoughts out on a page, right? It is something that helps you share with other folks. So you can start to go from, hey, it's this kind of thing in my head, to it's on the page, and then someone else might come in and, you know, kind of be like, yeah, it makes sense, but I want to kind of tweak that part, like, what's up with that? And so you can start to use the drawing as a way to get outside of your head, share and collaborate in a much more powerful way. And I just want to state that it's also an act of courage. So putting something on the page, suddenly I'm vulnerable. I feel really self-conscious, like, oh, you know, I'm a professor. This should be a nicer drawing, right? What I want you to do is have the courage to make that mark. And the confidence in your drawing, your own style, all of that stuff is going to come through. So just do this. Don't worry if it looks kind of all jacked up and weird. That's how you get better. All right, you wouldn't expect to pick up a piano and be able to play it perfectly the first time. So what we are going to do is I want to start by having you just warm up. So this is a muscle. Now, one of the things, and it's a little bit, I prefer bigger paper usually, but this is a physical activity. So you're gonna be moving around, and you want to make sure you can do that. I want you to start by drawing straight lines. Just cover the page with straight lines. So you should be drawing along with me once you get the hang of seeing what I'm doing. And one thing to note here that you can't quite see from the camera, but I'm kind of pivoting at my shoulder. What I'm not doing is pivoting at my wrist, right? See, because that becomes a pivot point, and then it's great if I want to make an arc, but it's also great if I want to make an arc that happens to correspond with the size of my wrist bones, right? If you want to draw something straight, you're going to need a larger pivot or a larger muscle group. So I'm really engaging my whole arm, and I'm just kind of keeping things moving from my shoulder. And what you want to do here is just get a sense of, just get a feel, right? I'm getting a feel for the paper, for the way the tension, right? The friction, all of that. And maybe oops, that's not going to work. But I'll move. And I'm right-handed, so this comes much more naturally to me, right? If I try to do this, it's very awkward. So if I wanted to go in that direction, I would just rotate the paper. Okay, so practice your line, and yeah, some of them will be curvy, some of them won't be what you want, but this is the repetition. This is just a warm-up to get your kind of feel for what it's like to draw and just get into your body. And this is a physical activity. Now what I want you to do is, next piece of warm-up. So now start drawing some circles. And again, I'm rotating from my shoulder joint. And you might want to draw some little ones and big ones. One thing that I'll say is practice drawing big. It's much easier. And especially, I'm using a Sharpie, but if I'm drawing like with a Sharpie, the kind of like something like this, there's so little room for error. And it just it kind of enforces this tentativeness. So please draw big. The other thing is that you might waste some paper here. And I know that folks are very conscious about conserving resources. The reason I don't feel guilty, and you can take me to task if you think I'm just kind of justifying it, but I believe it's true, is I would much prefer to waste several sheets of paper. I would waste a whole ream of paper if that's going to help me to not build an idea that's not worth building, right? So I would much rather utilize resources at this low fidelity than kind of commit to the time, the energy, the commute hours, the tool building, maybe a factory that's going to build something that's actually not worth building. So I would much rather work in this frame and waste some paper in order to generate ideas. So I think that's just a kind of process awareness thing that I've noticed, that it's just helpful for me to work in this way and not be too conscious about like, oh no, am I utilizing stuff. I also, This happens to be fresh paper. The other thing I do is I always use scrap paper because it's perfect. It's not precious. I don't mind if I'm seeing, an article show through the back of a page or not. Okay, so you've got your circles down. All right, and so the key thing too is it's going to help you is moving fast. If I'm trying to make a circle and I'm really trying to get, it's so hard, right? It's like trying to drive in a straight line when you're going 3 miles an hour, or if you're looking, just 10 feet ahead of the car. Just be loose and that's a skill. Finding how you get loose, right, will work. But it gives a kind of confidence to your line, and it's also more expressive. Your drawings are going to look different than mine, than anyone else's, right? That's the kind of beauty of this. They don't need to look uniform, and they actually shouldn't. If so, then why not just draw a circle in Illustrator? Okay. So we've got that, and now what I want you to do, and I'll just use this page. Just go get all groovy on. Just let if this doesn't feel good, you're doing it wrong. Just find a way. Squiggly the wiggly. Okay. So that looseness that you feel, that's how it should feel when you're drawing, right? And you'll work up to that, but that's a good thing. That's what you're going to be practicing. Okay. So we're all warmed up. Now, first thing I will introduce you to is my pet peeve. Stick people. Now, this is, it's very identifiable as oh yes, that's a person, we totally get that. But if you actually think about it, there's a bunch of issues with this. One, it's not very sophisticated looking, and there's a lot that you can do to kind of make that much more so. The other thing is, can you imagine how terrifying this would be if you saw this in real life? A figure with basically no knees, these tiny legs, crazy torso, right? A neck that's way longer than it should be, right? And then somehow here, is that a solid thing? Is that like a ring of fire? I don't know, because it's all these different, this is meant to look like, a kind of solid shape, whereas nothing else is solid. It's just, you're not going to kind of win any awards. Now, stick figures are great, and I encourage their use for folks. But as designers, I'm going to show you how you can do a lot better and just as easily. And the solution that I learned again from Molly and Kate was this thing called tooth people. So super simple, basically circle, which you just mastered, and then this, okay? So basically what it is it's, you can think of it as an upside down U. Couple of keys to tooth people is one, draw the circle. You should only lift your pen 2 times, right? So one lift. 2 lifts in the total thing. If you hear some whimpering in the background, that's my dog. All right, so, and what you want to do is, you can some folks draw them a little pointier like that. Just playing with it. So what I want you to do is draw as many tooth people as you can in the next minute. And it's okay if they overlap. Just fill the page with tooth people. And if you're wondering, the reason they're called tooth people is because that sort of looks like a tooth. You can imagine a whole mouth full of them. Okay, but I digress. So yeah, create the tooth people. And the idea here is that draw them in a way that you feel like you can, it's something that you can draw quickly. If you're taking more than a second per tooth person, you're taking too long. I think the only downside is if it ceases kind of seeming humanoid, then you might want to stop. Okay. So we've got now this kind of looks like Burning Man here. It's like, oh, they're all here worshiping the Burning Man. Okay, so we've got all these different tooth people, right? size, shapes, etc. One of the things I love about just drawing in this way where it's not precious is all these little kind of surprises tend to happen. And a lot of times, sometimes they're intentional and they work for the scene, sometimes not. But basically, let's take a look at what's going on here. So one of the things is, and this was just a kind of way that I drew this, but here, like, if we look at this, just suddenly, like, oh, like somebody's sad about something, right? You start to get this emotion that can come in. Or here, right? Maybe, right? So by having these two look away from each other, it's like, oh, did that, like, you know, is that a kid and that it's parent, and maybe they got in some kind of, you know, the kid's mad because couldn't get ice cream. Here, you know, you can see like, you know, right, little kind of doting family scene, right? And maybe like these two are really attached, and, you know, like he just works too much, so it's, you know, he's trying to figure out like how to reconnect with his kid. There's all sorts of things that can kind of emerge here. But basically one of the things that happens is just this idea of like the using eyes, right? And I'm just making 2 dots. This one I actually kind of screwed up. It's sort of like too weird because I just did the dots are too heavy. But basically what you want to do is just put dots, you know, a normal, you know, looking straight ahead would be like that. You know, if you do it lower, it kind of implies like looking down. Here, right, it's like, oh, he dreamed of a better life, you know, like he always wanted to escape the page. So you can find all sorts of ways, right, of using eyes to kind of create a sense of emotion, right? And that's something that you can very easily do. So if you do nothing else, never draw stick people again, draw tooth people. The other crazy thing is that stick people actually take a long time to draw. They take much longer than tooth people. So, so that's like, tooth people are super useful in that sense. The other thing I like about tooth people is that they at least look consistent. Unlike this kind of stick figure here, the tooth people, you get the sense that it's like, oh, okay, that's a kind of, whatever that shape is enclosed and it has mass. But you can also kind of add to that by, right? I mean, this is a little weird because maybe he got distracted by a bird or something. But anyway, right? These two, like, oh, they've got, you know, they're together, right? And, you know, it's just you can use really simple kind of arms as a way to create some kind of more depth to the scene, right? So here, you know, yeah, let's make, oh, they found a way to kind of do it. Like, and they can't get enough of that little one. Oh, they're so crazy about it. Oh, and this guy's a little sad. Maybe, you know, give him a cane suddenly. Oh, that's like a, you know, someone who's, you know, contemplating the rich life that they had, right? So here, again, just super simple. The other thing you can do with is just, yeah, you can give them little props, right? So here, maybe it's like a flag. It's like, so that is like, again, super simple. And suddenly you can communicate quite a bit. And this is just a really versatile tool because as designers, particularly in the conceptual phase, you might not, you know, this is different than a technical rendering where, you know, where you dig is going to be really critical. And so, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, all your markings are particularly aligned. This is much more of a communicative early stage type of drawing where you can communicate a very quick idea that you could then build on. All right, so those are tooth people, but again, at this point, you should have everything you need to be able to continue to draw them. Now, a little bit fancier is star people. So pay attention, I'll show you how to draw. You start by drawing a head, and then there's a couple of different flavors, but I like one where And you can see, I'm not perfect. I'm also kind of nervous. But basically here, I draw the shoulders and I come down. And I think generally what I try to do is I aim to have like the arm come down to about halfway, and then the kind of leg stop there. Every so often I get somebody that's like super leggy and they have like kind of basically no torso, and it's a little weird looking, but it happens, right? So, and then some people draw them like this, like super fast. I'm not good at that way. It's a little too, I like people to have shoulders. But anyway, you can still tell this is a person. And just so you know, this is, if it seems like, oh, well, this is this kind of rough way, like a lot of times, folks at IDEO, design firms, like folks will use this style as a way to communicate. And honestly, I'll include them, but I've used even something simpler than this. I used a bunch of basic tooth people drawings as part of a professional project I was working on around voting safety. So it's, and it's the kind of thing where I did it because I knew I could do it really fast. And in that sense, time was more critical than kind of having something that was like perfectly representational. Okay, so we've got star people. So these are a little fancier if you want to. The other thing that is really fun about star people is then you can start to dress them up, right? So it's like, maybe it's like, oh, it's a, they've got some kind of super asymmetrical dress. Maybe, this one's like, oh, it's like suddenly it's a kind of a sporting event. Maybe there's, I know that's not quite a basketball, but you get, it's basketball-ish enough. So the idea is just using, again, this is all kind of a fancy way of thinking about props, right? Maybe I'll give this person a tie. All right, so it's super, really economical ways of communicating some kind of texture and depth to the situation. All right, so now I'm going to back up 1 second. So let's say you wanted to draw a crowd. If we were trying to draw a whole bunch of, sorry, it's been a while since I've drawn stick. But basically, as you can see, stick figures take a while to draw. Let's say I wanted to draw a whole bunch of tooth people really quickly, right? One fast way to do it is I can do, right? Right, suddenly I've got a bunch of folks. Right, bunch of ways that you can do that, and it's super fast. And one little trick is that if you want to show like a crowd, what you can do is kind of offset the thing. Otherwise, it looks, oops. Okay, so not everyone here has a body or a head, but that just happens. And I think no one's, that doesn't really matter, right? Because you just get the sense like, oh, it's kind of a sketchy sort of drawing there. One note about tooth people is sometimes you might end up, if they're too squat, it either kind of looks like, I think it's Cartman from South Park. If the proportions are too, you might get something like this, which is starts to like cease to look, it looks more like a sunset setting on a setting sun or something. So generally, you just want to kind of play with your proportions. The other thing to keep in mind is if the body becomes too far from the head, that can start to like look a little bit strange. Or if the proportion, right, like that, that looks like a baby because proportionally babies have like bigger heads. So that's something where, or if you do something like that, it's just, it starts to look sort of ominous, like, I don't know, the Dread Pirate Roberts or something. Sorry, old reference. Good movie though. But yeah. But so anyway, you just want to kind of mind your proportions. So if it's not quite looking like you'd hoped, or if it doesn't look as sophisticated, that might be some of the issue. But yeah, the key things are don't make that distance too big, and don't make your, like if you're drawing like little moons, it's not gonna look as much like a person. It should look more or less like a tooth. Yeah, so let's talk about annotation arrows. Here's how I like to draw them. I prefer this kind rather than that kind because for me anyway, it just allows me to be looser somehow. And I tend to usually go in the same direction. I don't like to do that because I'm not quite as fluid. But basically, yeah, I'm just using these as a way to call out a detail, right? And then, maybe I'll say, like here I would have some text, right? And then maybe it's like, right, and that's some detail that's going to talk about, something, right? So that's a way that you can just get this kind of elegant type of clarity without having to make your drawing perfect. So I really like those arrows. The other type of arrow is more of like what I think of as like, it's a bit more almost decorative in a way, but I think of it as like a phase change arrow. And the way I learned to draw these is that you draw like 3 sides of a rectangle down. Right. So, and ideally what I want to aim for is to get my, the midpoint there, and then I want to get these lined up, which of course they're not. But again, this is where just practicing those can be useful. And these are super useful, particularly here, maybe let's say, I'm trying this and then, right? And so you get this sense of I think of it as a phase change, right? And then you can also do like little decorative things if you want. But rather than me trying to figure out like, what's the essence of lunch, right? How am I going to draw lunch, right? I just use this kind of phase change arrow to be like, oh, right. Like, and we don't know whether this person had a salad or a hot dog or like tuna tartare. It doesn't really matter. What we know is that they were unhappy, they had lunch, and now they're in a better place, right? That's what we know. Okay, so anyway, those are 2 types of arrows. Arrows are super useful, and I would highly recommend just playing with those, practicing those, and getting good at those. What I want to share with you now is how to draw just kind of quick range of emotions. So what you're going to do, draw 3 rows of 3. Okay, just like that. Then, in the middle of each of those rows, you're going to put 2 dots. Now, it's important that these are right in the middle of the circle, and so it should look like you have like 9 buttons or something, right? Then what I want you to do is in the first row, a little upturned thing about halfway down. Right? In the second row, just a straight line. And in the third row, kind of, right? So suddenly, now, oh man, we've got, there's 3 types of people in the world. There's these kind of happy people, the neutral folks, and then the unhappy folks, right? So we've managed just with this like super simple technique to be able to communicate like a different range of emotions. But we can take it a little further. And what we can do now is in the first column, it's clear it's column, we're no longer in rows. Right, adding eyebrows. And then second, we just go straight across. And then the third kind of arches up. Right, so now, like, suddenly, like, super different, right? We've got this, like, little mischievous one up here, right? And then, like, oh man, like, who doesn't want to help this person out, right? Like, and, like, she does, but she's not quite sure, and, like, you know, he's like, oh, like, I'm kind of excited, but I'm not sure, right? So there's all these ways in which this allows you to kind of have these emotions come through, right? And you can think of like how different this look is than this look, right? So this is kind of like emoji 101, but it's a super useful way to start to give character to your characters. Okay, so now, while I'll give you like a bonus tip, one thing that's kind of surprising here to most folks is that like the eyes technically are in the middle of the head. So if you're drawing, right, there's a temptation to put the eyes up here, but that's actually not true. But because what happens is there's hair, right? And here what happens is most people they'll draw something and they'll draw kind of hair like that. And that would be basically somebody with like a super high forehead, right? When in reality, like the hair is like mostly covering the head. So that's a kind of a way to, just a little tip for, so here you can go, right, that's, now it looks kind of wacky, but just having hair cover the head is a kind of a subtlety that looks better than if you just draw it off the head as if we're these kind of orbs that, you know, it's like all Chia Pet like. Okay, so one of the final things I want to talk to you about is just lettering, and I think a lot of you probably do this, but what I want you to do is, right, do 5 letters per row. Okay, so, and again, this was I love this. I heard this from Kate and Molly. So first thing you can do, so just all capital letters, right? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add like an embellishment, little serif at the end of these. And do whatever, you know, whatever works for you, right? You could, you know, doesn't have to, I'm doing like little circle things, you don't have to do that. So that's one way that you suddenly now have like your standard style and you've got this little kind of quirky serif style. Then another thing you can do is kind of just double up, right? So I'm just gonna kind of find, right? So now you can see the difference between this style and this style. Okay. Then here I can do kind of a kind of weird, like a bubble outline. All right, so now I've got this like loosey-goosey thing. And then here what I'll do is I'm gonna double them up. And then what I'm gonna do is kind of fill it in. But it's like, I'm not being too precious with it. Like, so now I've got this kind of boldy thing. And then maybe for the Z, I'll just do whatever I feel like. So anyway, that's a really quick way to just get a variety of text kind of styles, like if you're doing kind of visual note-taking or something like that. The final thing I'll do is, let's say, if I do a short phrase, right? So that's one way. Then if I think of like, what if I stretch it out? Right, so there, same word really stretched out, and then I'm going to do the opposite. So that's one of the ways that you can just get some very different kind of variety, and then there's little embellishments you might want to do, like, you know, just some different lines to cover. All right, so all of these are just like, again, just simple tips to get you started drawing. Again, the way to get better is to just draw. So if I have notebooks filled with kind of just random sketches, like half my stuff, even now, like I'm drawing and I see some of the stuff I shared with you all, and it's like, oh, I'm, you know, not a huge fan of it. But the idea is that you keep drawing, and your confidence to be able to draw is gonna come through, and it's gonna help just kind of communicate your ideas in a way that's super powerful. It's gonna help you think better. It's gonna externalize your ideas. It's gonna help you be more generative. It's gonna help other people be collaborative with you. So super critical skill. I expect to see you all drawing all the time. It should be fun, and if it's not fun, then maybe try to find a way to make it fun, because usually I find when it's not fun, it's because I'm trying to do something that's like just really not in my sweet spot, and I'm doing something that's kind of just not true to how I draw. So find your own style, do it, and run with it. All right, I hope that helped. Thanks.